So far, our investigation of ghostly events on the U.S. southern border has been limited to incidents that occurred on U.S. soil. Yet, there are just as many, if not more, haunting tales that began on the southern side of the same region. As we travel south of the border, join us for more stories of high weirdness. Previous editions have featured stories of high weirdness shared by retired or active U.S. Border Patrol agents. At the same time, similar occurrences appear to have occurred among those attempting to elude detention at the hands of these officers, migrants so desperate to enter the United States that they embark on perilous expeditions, endangering their lives in the process. They have faced threats similar to those reported by agents, but these dark and malevolent powers appear to pose a bigger menace than humans. It appears that phantom figures, odd monsters, and demonic beings consider the U.S. border's mountain and desert ranges to be their own private hunting grounds. Nogales is located in the Mexican state of Sonora, right across from the Arizonan city of the same name, on the opposite side of the U.S. southern border. Prior to the 1920s, the city's population was divided between the urban center and nearby smaller communities. However, the construction of the American border wall made it necessary for residents to travel between the two countries to work through the city's central checkpoint. As a result, many people in the surrounding areas preferred to relocate to the city itself, leaving their former towns to fall into obscurity. In one village, residents learnt to coexist with a strange and unsettling phenomenon that occurred during the warmest months and cloudless evenings, when the moon was at its peak in the night sky. At this point, the streets of the small village would abruptly empty, with the doors of the few remaining houses securely closed and locked. Then an unsettling disturbance would flow down into the town from the adjacent hillsides, sounding like a chorus of melancholy voices, as a small group of shuffling individuals emerged from the darkness and moved from house to house. Their fingers scraped at windows and doors, their ragged voices pleading for help from those within. The unique characteristics of their FA had long since been lost to the passage of time, replaced by learning schools. Their meandering journey through the settlement lasted only a few minutes before they returned to the mountains, where they had died many years before. They were reportedly denied food and water by the townspeople while on a risky trek. Their bodies were never located since they failed to get the required provisions in such a difficult environment. Every year when they return from their place of death, they either seek help from the settlement or accuse them of directly contributing to their deaths. This serves as a sinister reminder of the dangers that await those brave enough to embark on such an excursion. Lucy and Torres were born and raised in the Chad Juarez suburbs, near the checkpoint that leads to the American side of the border. She and her sisters had grown up hearing stories about the horrors on the impoverished border between the two countries. Like many other young Mexicans, she had also heard tales about another perilous barrier that separates the living from the dead. Although she had no personal experience with paranormal encounters, she had heard stories from others who had witnessed terrible apparitions. As a teenager, she had set out on a typical Saturday to visit one of her aunts, who lived a few blocks away. The route she took was well known among the villagers she encountered, being quite familiar to her. At the halfway point of the journey, H assumed the residence of an old resident who had lived alone for years. There were reports that the woman had dabbled in witchcraft and black magic when she was younger, so most of the community avoided her on this day. As Luciana passed by the property in question, she spotted someone standing between it and the adjacent dwelling. She froze in her tracks, staring in disbelief at a haunting figure just inside the short gap between the two. It was significantly taller than a typical person, with its head just above the roofs of the dwellings. Its thin figure appeared nearly skeletal, with one of its slender arms hung down by its side, almost touching the ground, and the other appearing to be reaching in through one of the open windows of the old woman's home. After observing the apparition for a few seconds, Luciana assumed it was a decoration left behind after the recent Day of the Dead celebrations. However, the tall figure's head slowly rotated to look directly at her, with glowing light blue eyes fixed on the teenage girl. Luciana was overcome with panic and walked straight to her aunt's house, where she resolved not to tell anybody about the experience. Several hours later, on her way back through the same area, she passed by the house in issue again, observing that the figure she had seen before had vanished. The entrance to the building opened, and two men emerged, carrying a laden stretcher covered in a blanket, which they carried across the street to a waiting ambulance. Over the next several days, The village gossiped that the old lady in question had been found dead in her house that same afternoon, lying on the floor directly next to the window where Luciana had seen the apparition, her hands clutching to her bosom and her face expressionless with shock and despair. Luciana believed she had encountered an unexpected visitor who had possessed the old woman's soul. Ethan Abra was unaware of the name of the abandoned community located near his home in the border town of Aga Preta. He remembered his father telling him once that it served as a staging point for coyotes bringing migrants over the adjacent desert and into U.S. territory. In the same breath, he had forbidden his kid from straying into the small cluster of decaying houses, especially after nightfall. These were warnings that neither Ethan nor his close companion Louise heeded, and they quickly established a tiny den in one of the damaged houses. For many of their treks, the only other visitors to the ghost town were the occasional ocelot or puma, which the boys had carefully avoided. Then one evening, after lingering a little too long in their cave, the boys were about to depart when Louise grabbed Ethan's arm. As Ethan listened, he noticed a disturbing sound coming from the far end of the line of buildings. It sounded like a woman wailing her laments, gradually increasing in volume as she reached the home where they were crouching down. The two boys stared at each other, terrified, having grown up hearing legends about the ghost of Lorona, a mother who drowned her children after learning her husband had gone and spent the afterlife looking for their souls. An enormous form appeared, silently moving down what was previously the town's central road. What the lads saw from their hiding position was not a dead woman but a massive feline beast far larger than any mountain lion or other big cat they had previously seen. Its torso was covered in what looked to be sharp quills, each appearing as lethal as a small knife or dagger. Huge claws clicked on the rough earth as it went, and its teeth worked back and forth in apparent hunger as they watched. It came to a stop outside the home. A pair of luminous eyes moved from side to side as if looking for something, and then, to their surprise, the strange monster flung back its head and let out the cry they had previously heard, which sounded just like a crying lady. It repeated this activity several times more, each time pausing near a house and emitting a mournful call. After a while, it paused and cocked its head to one side. The creature rushed off rapidly into the desert, heading towards the adjacent border wall. The lads abandoned the ghost town and returned home as soon as possible. The following morning, the pair awoke to reports that army helicopters had been spotted near the border wall, where the dead of numerous migrants had been discovered, having supposedly been mauled by a mountain lion while attempting to get into the United States. As a result, neither of the boys ever went near the abandoned community or ventured outside the town's borders at night again. During the mid-1990s, a young migrant named Mario successfully crossed the Sonora Desert into the United States, settling for a brief period on the outskirts of Phoenix. However, he was eventually discovered by local law enforcement and deported back to Mexico. He never again tried to cross the American border due to a horrifying incident that nearly cost him his life while crossing the desert. Along with Mar, he had fallen and hurt his ankle. As a result, he was sent to the back of the small group of travelers and instructed to keep an eye out for any indications that the authorities were pursuing them. With night fallen, the gang had been journeying for several hours, and Mario was becoming exhausted when he heard a voice in the darkness. Just behind him, a man spoke in Spanish, telling him that the coyote had vanished and was bringing the entire group to its demise. Stopping in his steps, Mario requested that whoever had spoken identify themselves but received no response. He began to suspect that he was hallucinating, and just as he went to walk away, the voice rang out again, but this time from a completely different direction. The unseen man proclaimed that he was trapped, injured, and in desperate need of water. Otherwise, he would die again. Mario requested that the stranger show himself, but was once again met with silence. The young man shrugged off the event and limped after the rest of the group. After about an hour, they all sat down to relax. Mario was attempting to sleep when he was abruptly woken up by a disturbing noise. Hurrying across to the remainder of the group, he discovered several young women screaming and shrieking that something had emerged from the darkness and snatched the coyote away. Mario and two other men walked a short way in search of their chaperone, but there was no indication of him whatsoever. The gang quickly packed up and continued north as they had been. Instructed in case they became separated from their escort, hours passed with Mario continuing to rear guard before he suddenly felt paralyzed to the position in horror. Once more, a voice emerged from the darkness, informing him that the gang was lost and marching to their doom. But this time it sounded exactly like their missing chaperone, speaking with the same cadence and tone as the first voice, shining the torch into the dark emptiness around him. Mario still couldn't see anything, and the same voice appeared again. Mario turned and hobbled after the rest of the party, repeating that he had fallen and was imprisoned and that if he didn't obtain water soon, he would surely die, with a yell of horror, only for a shadowy figure to emerge from the darkness behind him. A pair of powerful hands grabbed his knees and dragged him to the ground, attempting to pull him away from the gathering. He screamed and kicked out at his attacker, struggling with all his strength to avoid being seized. The torch beam swung around, revealing a terrible reptilian face with yellow eyes and sharp fangs, leathery arms coated in tan scales clinging to his legs, and sharp fingernails biting deep into his exposed flesh in a second. 2 gunshots boomed out behind him. The man holding the coyote's rifle yelled in Spanish for the animal to release go. The reptilian, as silent, simply growled at him before speaking again in the missing man's voice. They were informed that they would not survive another night in the desert, and that their flesh would be removed from their bones. It then flashed into the darkness, followed by 2 more rounds. The group brutally treated Mario's extensive lacerations on his arms and legs before pulling him off the ground and struggling into the dawn light. These stories may be dismissed as urban legends or fabrications to discourage others from attempting dangerous journeys. However, when combined with similar experiences reported by Border Patrol staff in the same areas, they become more unsettling each year. A growing number of cadavers are being collected near the southern U.S. border, the bodies of individuals who died attempting to cross. The question is whether they died as a result of the ever-present threats in our earthly sphere or something else lurking. Before I show you the trailer for a new podcast, I'd like to remind you that Beyond the Veil and Ballin Studios strive to provide the best storytelling with a unique, dark, and mysterious twist. We also support one another. That's why I'm so pleased to tell you about Band Studio's newest podcast, which you can listen to right now. It's titled Redacted: The Classified Mysteries with Luke Leman. You may be familiar with Luke from our excellent sister channel Wartime Stories and his podcast of the same name, but his new podcast Redacted is just mind-blowing and I can't stop listening. Governments and military services around the world have always kept their operations secret, but history shows that when you try too hard to hide something, it only makes people more curious, and we love nothing more than true stories with shocking secrets, from covert government experiments to bizarre assassination attempts. It covers everything, and Luke has a way of delving into these hidden truths and bringing them to life in an interesting way that makes me wonder how I never heard of this before. I cannot recommend Redacted: The Classified Mysteries enough. Redacted is accessible wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Redacted: Declassified Mysteries with LL Manna, or you may search for Borland Studios, which should come up. And now here is the trailer for Redacted: Declassified. Mysteries behind the closed doors of government offices and military compounds. There are hidden stories and buried secrets from the darkest corners of history, but the truth endures and eventually rises to the surface, from covert experiments pushing the boundaries of science to operations. We reveal this hidden history, which was scarcely talked about in unredacted declassified riddles each week. Consider Operation Paperclip, in which former Nazi scientists were brought to America after World War II not as prisoners but as assets to advance U.S. intelligence during the Cold War. Or the unsettling link between notorious cult leader Charles Manson and the CIA, a web of covert operations that suggests his infamous crimes were part of something far darker. These aren't just ancient conspiracy theories. They're thoroughly researched reports that show uncomfortable truths about our world now. The stories are real, and the revelations are stunning. Join me in exploring redacted classified mysteries. Join Luke Leman on the Rye app, or wherever you get your podcasts, and begin finding the facts they never intended you to know for early ad-free access. Join Rye Plus via the Rye app or on Apple Podcasts. Begin your free trial today. What they've kept concealed in the darkness, will bring to light time magnificent.